Hi team, and welcome back to our Anchor Fact series on the history of India. Last time we talked about the beginning of globalization, when the Portuguese first arrived in India. Today we're going to talk about the massive impact of globalization on India, focusing on the First World War. And I don't mean World War I. The first war fought on all the major continents was actually the 7 Years' War from 1756 to 63. And it pretty much decided the fate of India. Let's see how. India was always a unique place because of its physical geography. When you look at a computerized map of this kind, you get a special insight into why India is a unique cultural bloc. You see that the entire geographical region, which is sometimes referred to as South Asia, is ringed by mountains. What a map like this does is it gives a color to a spot on the map based on its elevation, meaning how high it is. And then it creates an artificial shadow, which highlights the effect, so that you get an exaggerated sense of differences of the size of things like mountains. But how exaggerated is it really? The Himalayas, here at the top, are the highest mountains in the world, including the famous Mount Everest. India, or South Asia, was always shielded from other cultures because of this ring of mountains. To the east were also jungles that few people crossed. There was almost only one way into the entire region of South Asia, which is sometimes called a subcontinent. That was the Khyber Pass. It was the Khyber Pass that Alexander the Great used to invade India. It was the Khyber Pass that the traders of the Silk Road used to enter India. It was the Khyber Pass that Muslim invasions used to invade India. So the Khyber Pass was one route that India experienced contact with the rest of the world, and it soon would again. Globalization, however, came by sea. It always came by sea. It came by sea to America because of Columbus and Cabot crossing the Atlantic. It came to China because Magellan later crossed the Pacific. It came to India because Vasco da Gama circumnavigated Africa. Of course, the only way to connect human life on all separate continents before human flight was by sea. When you combine all the voyages of the Age of Discovery and the long history of wars between European nations, what you get is a contest for empire that was based in Europe, of course, but which also played out in Asia and the Americas. The major players in this contest, who became the major combatants of the 7 Years' War, were France and Britain. France and Britain had competing empires in North America. France and Britain both had competing East India companies, who were slowly taking over India. As we will see in our Anchor Fact series on Europe, France and England had been enemies for centuries. They even fought a 100 Years' War against each other. So not surprisingly, when they both wanted to build empires around the world, they collided in many wars while doing it. The important thing that happened before the Europeans really began to compete over India, however, was that the Muslims made their final push. Like the previous Muslim invasions, it came through the Khyber Pass. The ruler, Babur, came from what is today Uzbekistan. That region had been Islamized ever since the First Great Jihad around 711 AD. Babur, the leader of the Mughals, was the descendant of other great conquerors, including Genghis Khan, the great Mongol leader who had started the largest empire in history, and Timur, also known as Tamerlane. Babur invaded India in 1526 and defeated the Sultan of Delhi at the Battle of Panipat. Two things were different about this wave of Muslim invasion. First, the conquerors stayed and truly became Indians. They weren't focused on something else. Second, the Europeans were now set up in India, and the local rulers began to have to choose who to align themselves with. The Mughals were the stronger force at first, and those local Indian rulers of the anarchy that was India, that were not conquered, preferred to be allies of the Mughals. But when the Europeans began to come in greater and greater numbers, the Indian rulers began to think according to one of the classic rules of war. The enemy of my enemy is... How does that phrase end? Usually, it is quoted as, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But that is simply not true. At Knowable World, we always adjust this famous saying. We say, the enemy of my enemy is my temporary ally. This is the trap that the infamous Mir Jafar of Bengal fell into. He saw that the British East India Company was the strongest of the European forces for competing control of India. He decided to become the temporary ally of the British. When he saw that much of Bengal's forces were committed to helping the Mughal Empire against another Muslim invader, he betrayed his own ruler, the Nawab of Bengal, who was allied with France as well. This helped the British to win the Battle of Plassey in 1757, which is captured in what is surely the most famous painting in Indian history, in which Mir Jafar is seen being greeted by the British commander Robert Clive. The British commander's horse is rearing up on its hind legs, and the elephant has a strangely human expression, with suspicion written all over its face. Why? Well, the British flag is being planted on Indian soil. This victory of the British over the French was soon mirrored by the British victory over France in Canada. This was the time of the peak of the tea trade from India to America. Can you think of what event in the American Revolution is connected to this war for control of India? That's a great symbol of globalization right there. The answer is in our Printable series. As we will see next time, Britain came to completely dominate India during the most important period in Indian history, the period of the British Raj. That's our topic for next time.